Ahead and get started with this session of the ROR Annual Community Meeting, National PID Policies and Practices. So first, just a little bit of housekeeping. We would remind you that the meeting is being recorded. Hopefully Zoom has reminded you of that as well. We will share the recording and slides with all registrants and in fact publicly afterward. Most likely tomorrow or Friday. We do ask you to follow our code of conduct. Let me paste a link to that in the chat here. Just quickly. You may keep your video on, you may keep it off. That's entirely up to you. We do ask you to please stay muted if you're not speaking. Since we do have quite an international audience here today, we want to remind you of one of the features in Zoom, which is that you can click show captions in order to see captions in your language, if that would make it easier for you to follow along with our English presentation. We will be holding a question and answer period at the end of the panel, but do feel free to use the chat to ask questions and in fact have discussions during the meeting as well. Very often those can result in quite active discussions. I'd like to very much thank all of our speakers for joining us. And I do just want to say that I know everyone has a lot on their minds right now, especially but not only in the US, and that things are uncertain and a bit chaotic. So I want to acknowledge that what we're all trying to do here is to produce and share better information about scholarly research for our own countries and indeed for the entire world. And I, for one, value that. And as a matter of fact, I value scholarly research, and I think that that's something that we all value. This is worthwhile work, and so is scholarly research. So again, tremendous gratitude to all of you who are joining. And I really appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to do this. I did also want to mention that Steffi Genderjahn of the PID Network Deutschland is sick today. So speaking in her place is Andreas Czerniak of the Bielefeld University Library. So we appreciate your stepping in, Andreas. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachael Kotarski of the University of Chicago Libraries in the United States. Rachael?
Thank you very much, Amanda. Hello, everyone, and hello to both colleagues who I've not met before and a few familiar names from the attendee list as well. So yes, I'm Rachael Kotarski. I'm currently Associate University Librarian for Digital Strategy and Services at the University of Chicago, but previously I'd worked at the British Library getting involved in developing the Data Site Consortium within the UK. So it means now that I'm getting involved with US persistent identifier infrastructure and strategies. And so I thought I'd use my time to kind of do a little bit of a comparison of where I feel the kind of the two countries are in terms of that national strategy. Crossing the pond, for those who are unfamiliar, the pond is what Brits, and I don't know to what extent Americans like to call the Atlantic Ocean a pond, just a bit of our kind of heavy UK sarcasm there. But also I was in the UK yesterday and have just got back into the US. So apologies for any jet lag, and also apologies because I picked up some kind of virus on the plane over here as well. So if I have to pause to have a little cough and take a cough sweet, then apologies, but hopefully I'll get through this whole thing quite quickly. What I wanted to start with was what I've called a short and incomplete history of PIDs within the UK, and just kind of my view on it to take us to a point where I can kind of compare some of the stuff that I have worked on within the UK and some of the stuff that we're doing in the US now at the moment. So prior to 2015, the UK really had an inconsistent approach to the sharing of research data. No real mention of persistent identifiers, even though we had been a founding member of DataCite at the British Library back in 2009. But in 2015, UK research funders developed a joint policy on research data, which explicitly mentioned persistent identifiers, which means that from 2016 onwards, persistent identifiers started to be seen as a kind of core research infrastructure within the UK, not least through that statement from the research funders, but also through efforts on European projects, working in collaboration with national data centres, government organisations, to say that actually an appropriate way to share and recognise data is to make sure that they can be cited. They use persistent identifiers for the outputs, as well as for the creators and for the funding of that research as well. So we get to a stage in 2020 where the UK was really looking at a coherent approach to persistent identifiers, and there was work to make the case for that coherence, pull in identifiers around organisations and projects as well, and really align all of that work. And what I've done with this timeline is included the two most recent annual research excellence framework exercises. So this is a process where the UK government research funders take a look at all of the work that they've funded over usually a 4 or 5 year period to see what the impact and the benefits of that work has been, looking at all of the outputs of that and what has been produced. And that exercise really has been a key driver for many to demonstrate their research impact, but also because they want to be able to demonstrate who has done what and produced that. Persistent identifiers have been really key to those processes. So through that period, the exercise has been expanded to really draw attention to diverse research output, so not just papers and data, but thinking about practice-based research, for instance, people producing exhibitions and podcasts and all of those kinds of things. And now that process does rely heavily on persistent identifiers for the data collection, in particular to avoid rekeying of metadata across systems. Some of you may be familiar with the MoreBrains consultants who did an assessment to identify how much or how many savings are possible through better use of persistent identifiers. And that work really kind of energized a lot of, actually, if we take a coherent approach to persistent identifiers, use them in as many processes and forms as possible, it really saves people a lot of time, which ultimately saves money. I have noticed that Alice Meadows is on here from MoreBrains, and she could probably link you to some of those works in the chat as well, if you don't mind doing that, Alice, because I don't have the links to hand to put it into the chat. I'm briefly pausing at 2020 here to just pull in some other pieces of work, but I will move on to what has happened very briefly since then. But just stepping sideways for a second, I was then involved in a call for infrastructure around supporting the view of collections at galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. So that is what GLAM stands for. And we proposed a project to understand how persistent identifiers could be used to connect within and between items in collections and their metadata. Primarily because from an arts and humanities standpoint, these kind of primary resources that are within galleries, libraries, archives, and museums are a key part of the research and key inputs into people doing that kind of research, and it wasn't really recognised. So we were looking for paths to recognition for the work that those collections holding institutions were doing and how they supported research. That project was funded and we got to move forward. Unfortunately, the project started in January 2020. So that did mean that the small number of kind of workshops that we had planned to hold at the British Library didn't happen. But actually what did happen is we moved them online and we had far more engagement with that project than we could ever have hoped to have. So we had our kickoff workshop in April 2020. And I think from what had originally been planned as a 40-person in-person workshop, we had about 120 people join us online from all across the globe. And that really demonstrated to us that this was really important work that people were interested in. We had a lot of people who had heard about persistent identifiers, knew that there would be some benefit for them, but really didn't know where to start. And actually that meant the outcomes of that project slightly shifted from what we had originally planned, I think. So despite starting in a global pandemic, the feedback that we got is that we needed to kind of provide a lot more guidance and expertise on what the benefits of use of persistent identifiers could be for people working in the GLAM sector and with collections that could be used in research. So that meant we were starting actually at a very base level of knowledge, but actually that was good because we could have those foundational conversations to bring people along with us on the journey, rather than continuing to speak to the people who were already interested in persistent identifiers, as we had been doing, I think, for a few years before then. What that also meant was that we were aiming not to tell people what they should be using. So it wasn't about saying, you know, you must use DOIs for this, you must use ORCIDs for that, you must use ROR for all these other cases. Actually, we were developing a framework of guidance for what are the things that you are trying to do and how do various persistent identifiers actually help you do that. So that is the kind of the track that we ended up taking, which I think was slightly different than what we had originally planned when we proposed the project. But it was all to the benefit, I think, of the work in the end. So we did develop that guidance, really thinking about baseline implementations and giving people an outline to which persistent identifiers do what, and mapping that onto essentially their kind of daily activities and lives and showing them which are the things that can be made easier. Some of that came with an exploration of what it really means to have a persistent identifier, and why in some cases identifiers that are, you know, not necessarily persistent, that don't necessarily meet the full definition of a persistent identifier, can still be useful for people. They are the step on that journey to using persistent identifiers, but also, you know, it gives them a kind of a halfway house to get buy-in and to show benefits of persistent identifiers where there may be some costs to implementing that infrastructure also. One of the key outcomes we had is this kind of mapping of functionalities of persistent identifiers onto the activities and the things that people were actually trying to do. And I think this is a good segue then a bit into experience in the US, because actually this is the point where I think we really have an intersection between what we're doing with the US National PID Strategy at the moment and the work that's happened in the UK so far. Coming back to that kind of timeline, I can't do as detailed a timeline for the US because I've not been here long enough to, to be able to map that out and have a good handle on that. But what I can tell you is there is not the same focus on research assessment. That was such a driving force in the UK, and there is not that driving force here in the US. The key driving force I think there is for adoption of persistent identifiers is looking at the minimum requirements for repositories. So persistent identifiers are mentioned within the kind of minimum requirements for repositories into which people should submit their research. I think also there will be an increasing need, depending on how the next year or so goes, to confirm that folks are meeting the funder mandate. So each of the federal funders essentially has their own set of requirements around public access to research. Very few of them explicitly ask for open access, but they do require public access. And that will need kind of tracking and ensuring people are actually doing what is asked of them by their funders over the next few years. And at the moment, it seems to me that there's not really a kind of good way of doing that. Persistent identifiers definitely seem like they will be a useful tool for doing that. We just have to kind of position them as a tool for those activities and kind of talk about which persistent identifiers will do the things that the funders need to do in order to do that tracking and administration piece, essentially. There has been work from the Open Research Funders Group, who've produced a number of reports and outputs in collaboration with Helios Open. One of the key work streams was about a framework for a US National PID Strategy, which has come also hand in hand along with the RDA National PID Strategies work, which obviously the UK folks are also deeply involved with. And I think Chris Brown is leading a lot of that work in the UK, and I think is on the call also, so he can probably link you to the latest there too. And so the reports that came out of the Open Researchers Funders Group have kind of set out some of these things like having desirable characteristics of persistent identifiers. So this is the thing that really maps onto the work that we were doing with the persistent identifiers in GLAM. Well, how is it that you define a persistent identifier? And how then can you use those features of a persistent identifier to underpin key research infrastructure and persistent identifier infrastructure? And so this report has kind of kicked off discussions around what a US National PID strategy should look like, to the point where we are now moving that forward into a NISO working group to create it into an actual standard. Now, I know that, a strategy is not necessarily directly mapped onto a standard, but the things that I've talked about here are the things that could essentially be a standard. So when we talk about what is a persistent identifier, defining that is a thing that can be part of a standard. Also talking about the roles and responsibilities in managing, maintaining, creating those persistent identifiers and the infrastructure around it are also things that can be defined within a standard and are things that are discussed in this report and work as well. So here are the desirable characteristics of persistent identifiers that the NISO work has already talked about, and actually refining these and formulating them is one of the key pieces of work that the NISO working group will be doing over the next 18 months. I think it's about 18 months that we have to pull this work together to define the report. We'll also be going out and doing some consultation. So we have a large group of folks working on this, and I don't remember where I've put in the names. You'll see them. I'll show the group in a second. And we have 18 months to kind of work on this, do some consultation, do some feedback, do some versions of a standard before it's kind of officially published. So you'll hear a lot more about this over the next 18 months as we develop that work. So I've talked about that's gone too far now. I've talked about the fact that we have this Open Research Funders Group report. That kind of gives us a head start as a NISO working group. Some of those working groups start with a completely blank slate. We don't have that. We do have wide US and as well as international representation on that group. And as I mentioned, we'll be requesting feedback and input. Now I do come to the makeup of the group. So I'm co-chairing this group with John Shadaki, who many of you will also know. It's very small, but you'll be able to access the slides afterwards with the list of members on that group as well. And I put in the link to the NISO page where all of this information is if you want to know more. So I guess the key thing I'm saying is we'll be formulating the ORFG reports into a standard, taking out the bits that are a key standard that we can actually use as a foundation for definitions, roles and responsibilities, and other kind of core elements of what will ultimately then be a recommendation for a US National PID strategy. And so we would love to get feedback when folks see that. And I think we'll absolutely continue to be in touch with this group to kind of keep that feedback loop going as well as the work develops. I did add a couple of slides in, but I don't think they have come out. Apologies. What I will just go back to the page where I added them in. Give me 1 second and I can talk about them. I was just going to say that work in the UK has also continued in parallel with this. JISC has pushed forward. There was a project on National Persistent Identifier Research Strategy, which recommended things such as a Research Identifiers National Coordinating Committee, which I was briefly on before I left the UK as well. And that's kind of continuing forward, again, in concert with the RDA work that Chris has already linked to in the chat. Thank you so much for that. And I'll admit that I haven't I do not know much more recently, but I'm sure Chris can point you to the latest updates on that. But essentially what we see is the US and the UK continuing to collaborate via RDA. We have, wildly different what should I say, regulatory and funding environments that we're working within. But the key aims, as Amanda said, about sharing research, make it publicly available, are the two things that are pushing forward both pieces of work. And so I hope that we can kind of continue to work together in concert and kind of agree on our kind of definitions and roles and responsibilities more broadly as well for persistent identifiers. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Sorry for slight slide jumpiness there. I think we'll all look to that National PID Strategy group with a lot of interest in the US. Appreciate it. I'd now like to hand over the presentations to Taras Hrendaš of the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic in Czechia. Taras?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for inviting, and thank you for picking such a nice cover picture. I like it. It kind of shows the courage we have to work on national evaluation of research in the Czech Republic, and also it shows seniority of my boss relative to me. So we are not making as large impact on the world of science as Rachel does in the US and in the UK. We are doing smaller scale assessment of research in a smaller country, Czech Republic. But let me just tell you briefly what exactly are we doing at the office, what issues do we face, do we encounter in data processing, and how persistent identifiers could resolve them, what are current obstacles and possibilities we have. So our main responsibility and main activity at the office, talking about me and my boss, Michal, who is here, is to run the so-called national evaluation round, which is done once per year, and which consists of several blocks of evaluating several aspects of research done by public research organizations in the Czech Republic. But we are primarily concerned with the so-called M2 part of this framework, which involves processing of bibliometric data and producing some statistics. So just to let you know, this statistics or statistical reports which we produce are not just for informational purposes. So these numbers which we have in the end have stronger impact on policy, on funds distribution. So every single number we produce has to be very precise. So like counts of publications, counts of research outputs really matter for us a lot. The data sources we use are limited to just national R&D database, the so-called ISVY, and Web of Science database. There are different reasons for why we are using these resources of data, but let me focus more specifically on what kinds of procedures, of what kind of routines are we running with this data, and what issues come up on our way. So the numbers, the statistics we calculate are at the two levels: the national level, where of course the total numbers do not really are not really influenced by any discrepancies in affiliation names, in counts of outputs per each individual research organization, but also we are producing some statistics and some evaluation metrics for institutions. So each institution, no matter how large or small it is, will get some reports, some numbers and graphs, which will require very precise calculations. So there are issues with the data on both sides. So ideally, the two sources of data we have in front of us, the National Registry of R&D outputs in the Czech Republic and Web of Science, or part of Web of Science covering Czech Republic, should match perfectly. So exactly the same number of outputs should be observed on both sides. But there are some issues on each side. So for example, some authors in the national database tend to forget or avoid registering their outputs. in which case we observe those outputs in Web of Science database and we add them to the evaluation procedure. So we kind of add in points to institutions if they publish these papers and otherwise they are not observed in the national database. On the other side, authors may report more affiliations in the national database rather than in the journals they publish in. Again, there might be different reasons for that, but this discrepancy affects the final numbers. On the Web of Science side, in about 4 to 11% of cases for the Czech Republic for the annual output, affiliation names are missing or affiliation strings are missing. So we are attempting to infer, to guess what institution is responsible for this output based on address string, which contains different spellings, misspellings. So we are trying to do that manually to clean the data ourselves. Another special case is the Czech Academy of Sciences, which is an umbrella institution, and it has several institutes inside it. So the national evaluation we are doing again is done at the level of individual institutions and individual institutes of Czech Academy of Sciences. But in the Web of Science data, not always one can observe which specific institute has produced a given journal article, for example. So in that case, again, we are going back to national database and checking through the Web of Science identifier which institutions are responsible for a given output. And in rare cases, of course, there might be just random mistakes, incorrect affiliations, and other kinds of problems. So there is definitely a need for some systematic solution of these problems. So we cannot just rely on the variations, on some statistical errors, because every single number matters for us, as I said. And as an internal solution in the Web of Science database, there is a so-called affiliation enhanced name. You can see on the screenshot on this example, for example, for one of the largest universities, Charles University in Prague, there are 800 different variations of affiliation strings in Web of Science, which means we would not be able to gather them and to put them together for the outputs we produce, but with the help of this enhanced name we do. And since we are going to use different platforms and different databases, we need some cross-platform solutions. So there should be some persistent identifier which would link this affiliation enhanced name in Web of Science and the national database of the Czech Republic, which might be or can be or is already ROR. And specifically speaking about this, thanks so much for the efforts of many people who made it possible. The Web of Science database has now integrated ROR. Unfortunately, as we already noticed, as we started to explore this integration and possibilities of using it in our evaluation procedures, we observe currently that the ROR identifiers are assigned by the Web of Science to addresses based on existing address to affiliation routine without any additional checks and interaction with authors who produced outputs. At the pros, of course, this makes possible retrospective adding of ROR to all outputs produced earlier. As cons, of course, there are still wrong affiliations of specific organizations. So adding ROR to incorrect enhanced name doesn't really help. As a close to ideal solution, it would be great to have ROR added to the Web of Science records through journals, through publishers, which would on their side collect specific RORs as they do with ORCID from authors when they submit publications for peer review, which is of course costly and very problematic. It cannot be automized. It cannot be done retrospectively. So only future records, only future publications can have this integration. And as a potential solution right now, without like somewhere balancing in between these two extremes, would be to let organizations, for example, the Czech Academy of Sciences, to edit or submit name variations assigned to Web of Science enhanced name, and the corresponding ROR, which is assigned to this enhanced name. So let me show you a specific example, just to give you a clear idea of what I mean by these issues. So there is a Web of Science record here of a journal publication article produced in 2022. One of the authors has affiliation with Czech Academy of Sciences, which is written here. This is a pure address string, which is messy, right? So Web of Science tried to guess name of organization from this string, and enhanced name for it was Czech Academy of Sciences. And the new feature they've added is ROR ID here, which gives me a link to Czech Academy of Sciences ROR record. But if you scroll down, you can see the Czech Academy of Sciences institutes have also RORs. So if you look more closely on this address string, you can see the name of Institute of Biophysics, which has its, sorry, I cannot switch to another tab. Yeah, which has its own ROR. So Institute of Biophysics could be mentioned here in ROR ID, but it's not. And this is the main obstacle for us. So oops, I've just stopped sharing slides, I guess. But anyway, that's yeah. So I think that's all on my side. And I would be happy to really hear your feedback, your ideas, and your insights about similar issues you encounter or potential or ideas for potential solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, especially on the practices side of the policies and practices. We are a little bit in danger of going over time, I just want to mention, but we'll do our best to hear from everybody else. And I'd like to now pass things over to Andreas Czerniak of Bielefeld University, who's speaking for about the PID network Deutschland. Andreas, would you like to share your screen? Yep.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. And it's an honor for us to present our project here in this call today. My colleague Steffi was ill, as said, and I wish him a quick recovery. So we will take a look to the German's way into persistent identifiers. Rachael gave a wonderful introduction on motivation, why using persistent identifier on different entities. And I will give you some insights from the PID network in Germany, which starts in March of 2023. The aim of the project, which was funded by the German Forschungsgemeinschaft, is to establish a network in science and culture regarding all the actors that are handling different digital objects or physical objects, and also to promote and standardized persistent identifier in Germany, because Germany is a federal state and we have a lot of actors here in Germany, and we will see a little bit in a minute about this. As well as we would like to support the dissemination and linking of PID systems. And as a final aim, we would come up with a national PID roadmap. And during our project, we have several tasks. Some tasks you see on the right side, and one task was a survey that will I present in a minute, and also the observation of PIDs in Germany afterwards. But PIDs are very wide in use, so we are focusing on 10 use cases. One is the research data, one is on instruments, one is on cultural objects, organization and projects that where I'm showing in a minute here, but also persons, physical objects, publication services and CRIS systems, as well as software, text publication and research and scientific events. Of all for these use cases, we have some workshops on it, on instruments as well as on cultural objects, and the next one is on physical objects. The events are mostly hybrid, so you can register also for the online keynotes here. As a next step, we have conducted a survey from March till May 2024 last year, which covers all, or which has questions about persistent identifiers, mostly some in general subjects, and also on distribution and utilization of PIDs in Germany, on information and training needs, challenges and gaps, and so on. So a quite big survey that we are sending out to a target group of all universities that we are reaching, University of Applied Science, as well as non-academic research institutes that we have many here, like Helmholtz, Max Planck, Fraunhofer, Leibniz, as well as some governmental research departments. And we reach 501 organizations and get back 25%. So quite good for this survey. And you see here on the right side the map of where of these institutions are fulfill our survey. On the X coordinate, you have management libraries, research data management, and so on. As on the Y1 is the different organizations that we are addressing here. And the result of this survey gives an overview about the familiarity with PIDs as a landscape view in Germany. And from these 25% answers, we got an overview of the whole landscape of PIDs. You see here 21 PIDs that we ask for, which are familiar with this or not, or less. And you see best known PIDs are overall organizations, are DOIs, ISBNs, ORCIDs, but also the German GND identifier from the National Library, as well as ROR and URNs. low level of awareness are identifiers that comes up in the last year, but some are 20 years old more. But you see here ARCs and IGSNs and also rates are mostly not familiar and not familiar with in these organizations currently.
Andreas, I just want to be conscious of time. We do have 2 other speakers yet to go, so I wonder if
Yes, I will speed up.
Thank you.
As well as we have some usage of PIDs, DOIs, of course, and ROR as an organization identifier that is used in many countries. So this was a snapshot from last year, and during the project, we developed an observation tool for continuous observation of the usage of PIDs in Germany, and we call it PID Monitor. It is launched last week and will give a continuous monitoring about PIDs in Germany, which based on different data sources like the Bielefeld Academic Search Engine, as well as the DataCite, corpus, and so on. The widely perspective view, I think you know it all. Cross-ref DOIs are articles, DataCite DOIs dataset, but this is not true. Because DataCite DOIs are also for articles and books, and based on these cases, you have a difference between the entities, purpose of use, and the PID type that we are distinguish in our monitor. And for organizations, you have some PIDs currently in Germany that are in use. In this case, the concept you can read afterwards, but we are distinguish PID types and entities for the purpose. The PID Monitor gives you an overview about here research data sets in Germany, but also beyond in Europe, as well as difference between on research data sets and open data subset on this, as well as we focusing not only on those entities, what I'm saying, also on registries, and take also a look to ROR. Here you can see the evolution of ROR implementations in Germany over the time since 2023 in December till now, as well as organization identifiers for non-education. It's not so interesting, but organizations in education status is interesting, and we see here a drop in the end of last year, I think, on metadata quality assurance issues. Our next steps here is more PID types and entities integration, visualization, improvement, and as I said in the beginning, the national PID roadmap is the one thing. I would like to thank you with this and for your attention, and also my colleagues, and here are the link to the PID Monitor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to pass things right over again to Washington Segundo of IBICT in Brazil. Make sure I've got the right screen. And I did want to mention as well that we are running over time, but if you can stay around for a few minutes afterwards, we'd be happy to stay around with you. Washington? Oh, let me forward. There we go.
So thank you very much. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity of presenting this to this group. The next slide. Let me see. Okay, I work at the Brazilian Institute of Information Science Technology. It's an institute, a governmental agency in Brazil that deals with information infrastructures in science and technology, and also the socialization or integration of the scientific technological knowledge. Next. So I will present some selected infrastructures that use PIDs. Our national portal of thesis and dissertations, BDTD, a portal that aggregates also publications like articles and other content from repositories, digital repositories, and national ecosystem like a CRIS for Brazil, and also a directory of the electronic journals in Brazil. And finally, present very fast the concepts of Laguna, that is a data lake for processing scientific data, and also finally the DARK. It's an implementation of ARC PID in a distributed system, a blockchain consortium. Please, next slide. So BDTD, it's a national repository of thesis dissertations. It aggregates more than 140 digital libraries, and it has more than 1 million thesis dissertations in full text thesis dissertations. All these were defended in Brazil, were presented in Brazil for the course of doctoral and master courses. Okay, sorry, next slide, please. Okay. So this is OASIS-BR. It's an extension of BDTD. It aggregates not only the thesis dissertation, but also all the content that are in the national repositories, digital repositories. So we have in this platform the aggregation of more than 17 research data repositories as well. So it has more than 5 million digital objects, and it's a target for us to put PIDs for all the content of this national portal. Please, next. So we also are using OASIS-BR to certify information that is declared in our national platform of CVs, CVs platform. It's a platform, it's a huge platform. It has more than 8 million profiles. And the declarations of these dissertations are already certified by the OASIS-BR via a search in the national repositories that has this content, the full text of the thesis of or the dissertation. Once we find this content in a national repository, we put a seal in front of the title of the thesis or the dissertation that points to the content in the repository, and it is a kind of a certification that the auto-declarative information about thesis dissertations in the profiles are actually true. Please, next. So this is the BrCRIS, is a CRIS at the national level. It aggregates all the ecosystem of the Brazilian research. It was launched in 2023, but it has already a very strong infrastructure to provide some indicators, dashboards, and so on. Please, next. So this is the homepage of BrCRIS. It's possible to search for publications, people, journals, organizations, patents, our national courses of doctoral courses and master courses, and also research groups and software as outputs. Please, next. So this is some examples of dashboards that we are, the dynamic dashboards that we are building over this platform, BrCRIS. Here we have some kind of selection of research areas, field, the time evolution of the publications, and the geographic localization of this in Brazil, and also some metrics that we can apply to this database, this organized database. Please, the next. So another project that boosts this BrCRIS is the Laguna project. It's a data lake that process all this information that we grab from external sources, Brazil, and also from national sources, and put all this together and exports to BrCRIS and other instances to be analyzed and to build indicators for the evaluation of science. So this is a very simple diagram, but it's just to exemplify how the data is processed. It's a kind of pyramids that we grab the information as it is in the outside, and we are improving this information and making this until it could be exported to a semantic repository and to build APIs and dashboards as we are doing in BrCRIS. Next, please. So the next tool that we have is this directory of Brazilian journals. Its name is Miguelin. It's a reference of Brazilian literature. It's a portal that aggregates information about more than 5,000 Brazilian journals, Brazilian electronic journals. And we have a lot of metadata about these journals that could be analyzed and also to produce some metrics about the quality of these journals, because we have a lot of journals in Brazil and we need to split it in the journals of good quality and the journals that are not with so good quality. This is the objective of this directory. Next, please. It's just to show more about the metadata that we're aggregating with this directory. We have a lot of fields that allow us to analyze some things like endogeny and other things that are important to observe in scientific journals. Next, please. So finally, our DARK project. DARK is an implementation of archival research keys that is already a PID. And we implemented it in a blockchain network, a blockchain consortium network. And we are in our first beta phase. So we are working together with the La Referencia network. It's a network with 12 countries in Latin America and also Spain. And it's a very interesting project for us because it allows us to have more governance about our resources in the research ecosystem. So the point is mostly of the outputs, research outputs in Latin America, in Brazil especially, don't have PID, and it's hard to fulfill all of this. So it's a fast way to have PIDs for this amount of legacy production that doesn't have PIDs. So it's a way to do it collaboratively and distributively without any cost beyond the infrastructure that you need to provide this blockchain consortium. Next, please. So it's an example. We already started to assign these PIDs, these dark PIDs, for our Oasis BR platform and for the repositories that are in Oasis BR, that are harvested by Oasis BR. And this is growing to fulfill all the Oasis BR content. And then we are we're planning to expand it of all La Referencia region. So our perspectives on this work is to use massively PIDs to organize our information and to have governance about this information. And for PIDs, we are very comprehensive, like the traditional PIDs, like DOI, ROR, ORCID, and so on. And also this alternative PID that we are building on, that is the dark PID, with a generic purpose for this in ROR as well. Yeah. ROR is massively used in the BrCRIS already. And we need to develop these technologies for the Latin America and the global South as well, because we think that it's a demand, there is a demand for it, yeah, a very strong demand. And also to reduce dependence on commercial platforms, because we are very dependent in the evaluation process, mainly in Brazil, with the ports provided by commercial initiatives. We need to have some kind of independency on it. And also to be able to create new evaluation metrics for science, because we think that the metrics that we are using now is not so fair as we want to be. And also promote all this regional, international collaboration in open science. Next, please. So it's very hard to implement it, but we are making some progress because of technical and technological difficulties. We're not able to have stronger human resources, but we are doing some advancing on it. And we also have lack of legislation on open science and also a national strategy for PIDs. So we are working to mitigate all these challenges that we have ahead. So we're trust that the academic culture need to have no traditional commercial sources for evaluation models. So that's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Washington. Fascinating work, and I hope people do take a closer look. We are at the top of the hour. I'm so sorry for Michelle. For those of you who do need to leave, we invite you to watch the recording. This will be shared publicly. But meanwhile, if you can stay around, please do. I'm going to share the link to Michelle's wonderful report that she'll speak about in just a moment. And with that, we'll hand it over to you, Michal.
So I will try to be as brief as possible. Thank you very much to the organisers for the invitation to present at today's meeting and to share some insights into the development of Ireland's national persistent identifier recommendations and roadmaps. This report was launched in late October 2024, so a little over 3 months ago. And so I suppose this presentation is very much from the policies perspective as opposed to the implementation or the practices perspective. The report was prepared by Ireland's National Open Research Forum, which is the entity responsible for overseeing and guiding the implementation of the Irish Agenda for Open Research, together with the North PID Task Force and the Scholarly Communications Consultants More Brains Cooperative, who were name-checked a couple of times earlier on in the presentation. So in terms of national drivers for PID policies, then in the Irish context, the National PID Strategy is considered to be a constituent part of our National Open Research Strategy, more broadly speaking. So the project to deliver this roadmap was initiated in response to two national strategies, which are Impact 2030, that's Ireland's research and innovation strategy, and the National Action Plan for Open Research 2022 to 2030. And these national policies really did frame the design and delivery of our work. So I'll just take a few moments to discuss those a little bit further and Ireland's ambitions in open research, more broadly speaking. So the nationally then Impact 2030 outlines a vision for Ireland to become an international leader in open research and positions open research as a key policy agenda. Within the 5 pillars of Impact 2030, open research falls under Pillar 2 on the impact of research and innovation structures on excellence and outcomes. And then it also falls under Pillar 5 on all Ireland, EU and global connectivity within broader objectives relating to the 10-year European Pact for Research Innovation, the European Research Area Policy Agenda, national ambitions in Horizon Europe and the European Open Science Cloud. So on another level, I suppose, the European policies were also driving this policy. So within the framework of our national policy, we built the argument that PIDs would be our key components to delivering our open research agenda, but also to delivering other aspects of the national research agenda, more broadly speaking, particularly with regards to connectivity and the research infrastructure. So our ambitions then, our national ambitions in open research are articulated in the goals and actions that are set forth in Ireland's National Action Plan for Open Research. So just very briefly, and again, this is quite a policy heavy introduction to our PID strategy. The National Action Plan for Open Research builds on several other national policies and international recommendations, including the National Principles on Open Access, the European Commission recommendations on access to and preservation of scientific information, the National Framework on the Transition to an Open Science Research Environment, and the UNESCO recommendations on open science. And then the plan itself is structured around 3 themes, which are establishing a culture of open research, achieving 100% open access to research publications, and enabling fair research data and other outcomes. So Action 4.4 of the National Action Plan for Open Research calls for national investment in persistent identifier infrastructure to enable consistent monitoring and improve interoperability via Action 4.1, which is to support the Irish ORCID Consortium and encourage further development and adoption of ORCID according to international best practice for researchers and within the systems and processes of publishers, research performing organisations, research funding organisations and infrastructures. And then Action 4.4.2, which is to develop a national roadmap for the adoption of a range of persistent identifiers according to international best practice, such as ORCID, DOIs, RAIDs and ROR identifiers. And then to implement this roadmap to consolidate a national coordination and accelerate the uptake and integration of priority identifiers. So an action, I suppose, of 2 halves. So to that end then, work to develop the PID strategy was undertaken by NORF. As I mentioned earlier, we also had a national PID task force and we employed More Brains Cooperative. So the project itself had 2 key deliverables, which were to develop an Irish PID cost benefit analysis and to draft a national PID strategy and roadmap. And then There are other supporting documents to enable us to promote and socialise the strategy. This is the timeline for the project, which I will return to again just in the lessons learned segment of the presentation. So in terms of some of the activities that were taken, the development of the Irish PID strategy was a very inclusive process focusing on thorough stakeholder and community consultations. And all of the recommendations are evidence-based, and the project activities included a survey, the cost benefits analysis, which I'll get into in more detail very brief in a moment. Focus groups, what I am informed is a particularly grueling strategic SWOT analysis. I was not in the post for it, but it is legendary now at this stage. And the outcome of that SWOT analysis then was taken back to the community to be, I suppose, consulted upon and verified. So the project outputs. The cost benefit analysis then. So the key thing to note here is that the cost benefit analysis answers two questions. So the first is how much time and therefore money would be saved if this information, that is PIDs about research activity, moved from system to system automatically. And then the second is how much difference would having a central support service to support widespread PID adoption to Irish higher education institutions make. So the creation of a central support service comprising 3 full-time equivalent staff, that is 2 technical and 1 community manager. It is estimated to accelerate national PID implementations and adoption, lowering the cost of adoption by up to 50%, resulting in an earlier and higher return on investment. This proposed service would support 25 institutions, including 16 publicly funded higher education institutions, along with several other institutions and bodies that receive exchequer funding in Ireland. A conservative estimate of the potential savings from an 85% PID adoption level after 5 years, feasible if the support service is established, equates to more than 4,000 days of staff time each year, which is the equivalent of nearly €1.8 million. This would more than cover the costs of both implementing the 4 priority PIDs at all the supported institutions, as well as the central support service itself. It's estimated again that financial break-even would be achieved in under 3 years, and a total 5-year projected financial benefit to the nation of over €1.6 million. So that's after the cost of salary, overheads and technical implementation. And I think it's particularly noteworthy that this figure relates to just assessing the opportunity costs of re-entering metadata about articles, grants and projects. So the final project output then was the recommendations and roadmaps for an Irish PID strategy. We have 15 recommendations that focus on 4 themes: governance and leadership, community, culture change and technical support. And then the Irish PID roadmap incorporates all of our recommendations, broken down into key thematic actions, a chronological sequence of these actions with additional narrative and links to specific recommendations is also provided. And I also just want to mention the 3 strategy briefing documents that were that are each aimed at a different audience for this work, and details of those strategy briefs are available on the NORF website as well. So, as I said, we have moved from the delivery of the roadmap, I suppose, to the implementation phase. We're in a very early stage of that. So we continue to engage with senior leaders across all sectors. And we have launched and continue to promote the PID recommendations and roadmap. To maintain current engagement with international PID initiatives, of course, this presentation forms part of that action. We are socialising the roadmap and related initiatives, especially the governing groups. So without going into too much detail, one of the first recommendations as part of the plan is to establish a governing group to take responsibility for the implementation of the roadmap and strategy. And then towards the end of the year will be the full publication of the first annual progress review and report. So the goal is to have a host institution that will, of course, host the central support service. And in the intervening period, NORF is taking responsibility for chairing the governing group and producing that review and report. But it is the objective for that report to pass, the responsibility for that report to pass on to the central support service in the future. I'm going to finish up now very briefly, just with some lessons learned, I suppose, if anyone wanted to go down the route of a cost-benefit analysis and recommendation roadmap as we did. So I suppose, as I mentioned, the project timeline earlier on. So if you look at it there, you've got the kind of the pre-project timeline and the project proper timeline. So the tender development and procurement from February 2023 to September 2023, which is roughly 8 months. I suppose I would just, my first recommendation or lessons learned would be to take that into consideration when looking at this project. There was a lot of international consultation that was involved, as well as national consultation, in order to develop those tender documents and to really get a strong sense of what we wanted this work to do at a national level. So just as, I suppose, work intensive as the project itself. More brains then were hired, or their contract, should I say, was initiated in September 2023, and then the task force was their kickoff was also in September 2023. And the project was given a duration of 9 months with a further possibility of a 3-month extension. And if I could do it again, I would say that time should be doubled. So Ireland is a small country. It's an even smaller community that is interested in this work, and it's very work intensive for the community that's involved. So a longer lead-in period, greater notification, I suppose, of the activities that are going to be involved, and maybe the level of expectation around engagement again, and then to be able to spread those activities over a longer period of time in order to maximize engagement and to try and avoid fatigue. Because in the Irish context, at least, those who are engaged in the persistent identifier work are also engaged in the open research work, more broadly speaking, which is also a very active area at the moment. So just consciousness to those that give their time freely to these activities. There are other lessons learned in terms of buy-in from funding bodies. At the outset and throughout the project. Think about who you're targeting your strategy to. So this presentation is very policy heavy and probably quite heavy in policy speak, but the reason for that is because our PID strategy is directed at policymakers and those who hold the national purse strings, I suppose. So conscious of time, it is 5:15, so I just want to thank those of you who are able to stay on to hear me speak, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or if you want to get in touch afterwards, my email address is there as well.